Plans to help British people to get onto the housing ladder. I'll be joined shortly by former Brexit Secretary David Davis. Is the Prime Minister safe after winning the no confidence vote? Also, a new report calls for the legal age for smoking to be raised. And later in the show, I have an exclusive interview with former Labour Cabinet Minister Alan Johnson, who takes us through his political memories. First, it's the news with Rhiannon.
Thank you, Gloria. Good afternoon. It's just gone 1 minute past 12. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The government says it will carefully consider an independent review into smoking, which recommends under 18s should never be able to legally buy tobacco. It suggests the legal age in England should be raised from 18 by 1 year every year until no one can buy it. The report also says tobacco firms should be forced to pay a polluter tax to help smokers quit. It's estimated there are 7 million smokers across the UK. The average price of filling up a typical family car has surpassed £100 for the first time. The RAC says it's a truly dark day for drivers. The average price for a litre of petrol has reached a record 182 pence and diesel is at a record 188 pence. It's after the biggest daily jump in petrol prices for 17 years. Senior Environmental Research Fellow at Imperial College, Malcolm Grimston, told GB News it's only going to get worse.
There's about a 2-week gap between the wholesale price of oil increases and that price going through to the pumps. And that's because we don't store a great deal of petrol. So when the price goes up, ultimately the pump price has to go up as well. The fundamental driver of this is the international oil situation. And there's no sign of it getting better. We don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine, but sanctions on Russia are likely to increase rather than decrease. It just shows that we didn't invest enough in robustness in the system to deal with these sorts of things during the good times. And we're now paying.
The Prime Minister is set to announce a string of housing reforms. They include plans for lower-paid workers to use housing benefits to buy their homes. Boris Johnson will make a speech in Lancashire later. It's expected he'll extend the right to buy scheme for housing association tenants. He'll argue £30 billion in housing benefit that currently goes towards rent could help people secure and pay for mortgages. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says he doesn't believe the new measures will be effective.
The announcement today from the Prime Minister is the wrong approach. It is a reheated version of an idea that the government had back in 2015. They piloted it, it didn't work. And if ever you needed evidence that this divided government is completely out of ideas, it's this announcement today, which is simply reheating an old idea. They piloted it, it didn't work. They really are at the end of the road.
Thousands of customers were provided an unacceptable service by electricity networks following Storm Arwen. A review by the energy watchdog Ofgem found many households were without power for more than 10 days. Some complained of poor communication from their suppliers about when they'd be reconnected. The storm, which carried winds of up to 100 miles per hour, left nearly 1 million homes in Britain without power in November last year. A firefighters' union leader says he isn't hopeful that the Grenfell Tower inquiry will lead to significant change. Matt Rack, General Secretary of the Fire Brigades Union, has warned that lessons aren't being learned from fires in the UK. He says there are still many buildings with the same cladding as Grenfell Tower and that the removal process has been painfully slow. A vigil's been held in central London this morning for a British journalist and an Indigenous expert who are missing in the Brazilian Amazon. Dom Phillips and Bruno Araújo Pereira vanished from a remote part of the rainforest more than 3 days ago. They were reportedly last seen early on Sunday. The Brazilian government has dispatched Navy, Army and federal police personnel to join a search for the pair in the vast Indigenous reserve. Dom Phillips' sister Sian asks why it's taken so long to start an investigation.
We want to carry on with the search. We want to find out what is happening to them, and we want anyone responsible for any criminal acts to be brought to justice. We want a persistent, deep and open investigation.
And the libel claim made by the Duke of Sussex against the Mail on Sunday publisher is having its preliminary hearing at the High Court. Prince Harry is suing Associated Newspapers Limited after they published a story on his legal case against the Home Office. It was in regards to his security arrangements whilst visiting the UK. In his claim filed with the court, Harry said the piece published in February allegedly caused him substantial hurt and embarrassment. This is GB News. We'll have more as it happens now, though. It's back to the briefing with Gloria.
Coming up this hour on The Briefing, as Boris Johnson tries to reset his leadership after so many of his own MPs voted to get rid of him, I'll ask David Davis whether he can save himself and how he can help the Conservative Party win back disgruntled voters. And as the cost of filling an average family car hits a hideous £100, our reporter Will Hollis reports from a petrol station in Nottingham. And should the age you can buy cigarettes rise to 21 from 18? That's the advice to the government. I'll discuss that with Deborah Arnott from Action on Smoking and Health. And I've interviewed Labour grandee Alan Johnson for the second in my new series, Life and Times. He favours Lisa Nandy as the next Labour leader, says that Jeremy Corbyn must never be allowed back into the party. Boris Johnson won his confidence vote on Monday, but with 41% of his own MPs voting against him, he now needs to reset his leadership and tell voters how he plans to help them. Many Conservatives feel he's not Conservative enough, while many others, voters, want more help from the government as prices rocket. So what should he do? Conservative MP David Davis has written an article about what Boris Johnson must now do to save the party from disaster. And I'm delighted that he joins me now.Hello, David. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Give my regards to my mate, Alan Johnson.
Will do. I'm going to start by putting a quote from you from an article you wrote yesterday. What I hope Johnson will now avoid is a set of populist policies that are drafted in the hope of shoring up our immediate popularity. This may work in the very short term, but if the policy is not thought through carefully enough, it will end up with dreadful headlines as it goes wrong. So my question is, where, in your view, does expansion of the right to buy for housing association tenants and using housing benefit to help people become first-time buyers rank on your test?
Oh, well, of itself, it's not a bad policy. I mean, ironically, I think the news referred to it as going back to 2015. In fact, the first announcement, ironically, was by me in 2002. That's how old it is. So it's not exactly brand new. It's got perfectly sensible underpinning in terms of bringing more people into home ownership. I mean, my parents became homeowners, council house tenants became homeowners under Margaret Thatcher. So that of itself is a good policy. What it won't do is solve the high housing crisis. I mean, we're 1 million houses short. We are building 100,000 houses too few every year. I saw Michael Gove saying, well, some of the money of this will go back into, money people put in will go back into building new houses. It's not lack of money we have for houses, it's lack of land. So we need this policy's fine, but we need other policies behind it so that my children's generation have the same opportunities I had, and indeed I suspect you had. I mean, 65% of my generation in my 20s had the right to buy could buy their own home. Today it's 25%. So it solves part of the problem, but it's not enough of it,
But you're a constituency MP, just like I was a constituency MP, just like loads of those new Conservative MPs and existing ones as well, will fear that that solution involves building on areas of their constituencies when residents are almost always against any building. So how does he square that circle with his own MPs?
If you jump, I'm sure you're always helicoptered around, Gloria. If you jumped in a helicopter and flew across Britain, it looks like a golf course. There's lots and lots of green land. There's lots of open land. The difficulty is we keep building on the edges of villages and the edges of towns. And of course you get what they rudely call NIMBYs, but people wanting to preserve their own countryside. What I'd like to see are garden villages and garden towns. We built them in the 20s. and we built them really nice houses with twice as big, literally twice as big as the houses we build now. So we need a really radical new policy, actually using the open land beyond the greenbelt. We could do that. There are, this is. I talked to Robert Jenrick about it when he was sort of housing secretary, and he thought it was quite a good idea. They've got to be a bit more imaginative. We can't just go back in the old, in the sort of old policies pot and say, oh, let's try this one again. Otherwise, you'll get the response you just got from Keir Starmer saying, oh, you've tried this before. Actually, it's a perfectly good policy what they've got, but it's not enough by itself. It's nowhere near enough by itself.
And just to go back to the article you wrote yesterday, I read it well. You also referenced the confidence vote on Monday, and you said those that pursued that confidence vote should have waited till the result of the by-elections and the Privileges Committee. What happens if you lose one or both of those seats? Because you say that the rules on a challenge under which Boris Johnson is safe for 12 months shouldn't be changed. So what happens?
No, I don't. And let me be clear. I don't want. This has been run before. This idea. Oh well, we haven't won that confidence vote or defeated the leadership in that confidence vote. Let's have another one in another few months. You can't do that. Prime Minister has to be able to do his job and not spend all his time looking over his shoulder. But when I first intervened on Boris, in the name of God go, quote, now I guess famous, I said at the time, this is going to be a death for 1,000 cuts, it's going to go on till the end of the year, and I fear that's actually what's going to happen. There were two critical issues. One, what happens with the by-elections? My hunch, I hope we don't lose both of them, but my hunch is we may. And so that's the first problem. We should have had that behind us. But also, even more importantly, the Privilege Committee. Now, the Privilege Committee will probably come to a conclusion on the question of whether the Prime Minister misled the House, deliberately misled, not accidentally, not, we all make mistakes in dispatch box, but whether he deliberately misled the House. And that's the really core key issue. And that will come up later in the year. I suspect now we won't get around to concluding that until October, November. But then the party's got to make a decision. If the Prime Minister is found not to have misled the House, fine, we carry on. If he's found to have misled the House, then we've got to decide what we do about it. And that's really that's much more serious than all the arguments that have gone before. That was why I said wait.
What tool would you have to do something about it, in your own words? What tool would you have? Because he's immune from a confidence vote for 12 months.
In truth, what would happen if he was found guilty of that is he'd actually be in breach of one of the most fundamental parts of the code, the ministerial code, which says you have to resign. It says if you have deliberately misled the House and you're found to have done so, then you have to resign. So in a way, it's belt and braces. But I suspect if that happened, there'll be a big debate in the House, ending up with a vote on his ability to continue his tenure as Prime Minister. But let's wait and see how it plays out. And I don't want to preempt that. It's for the Privileges Committee to do that job, and it would be quite wrong for another MP to try and second guess them. But we should understand the consequences are very serious if they find against him.
Philip Hammond, your former colleague, the former Chancellor, has said this morning that Boris Johnson will not lead the Conservative Party into the next election. What do you reckon?
I don't know. I think it really all rides on the Privileges Committee now. If the Privileges Committee find in his favour, then I think he will lead us in the next election. I think we're going to have a tough time winning it under those circumstances. But, that's why I wrote that article, because I take the view that, the vote matters. We had this confidence vote. He was run close. I mean, he did less well than, let's say, Theresa May or John Major or others before him, but he won. So, he has to be given the option of now making it work, which is why I wrote about all the things you have to do. I mean, it's not, the Johnson supporters and his team say he makes all the big calls right. Well, that's arguable. But from the point of view of the ordinary citizen, they want to get all the small calls, well, what he may think of as small calls, right? And may not be very small if you can't get a passport to go on holiday, or if you can't get a GP's appointment, or if you can't get your driving license, or, as is the case with one of my constituents, couldn't get their pension on time. They had to wait 4 or 5 months before they got their pension. Those small calls may be details to the cabinet. But if it's you on the other end of it, that's not small at all. And what I've said is, we've got to up the general game of the government to deliver. COVID happened. It caused lots of problems, lots of difficulties, but we're past it now. It's no longer, we can't use it as an excuse anymore. And we've got to start delivering. If we want to win the next election, we've got to prove to the people that we are able to do a competent job running the government. And that will not just be about the big calls. It'll be about the more detailed ones that affect everybody's daily life.
David Davis, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for your time today. Thank you. Now, the accelerating price of petrol continues to worry drivers across the country as the price per litre jumped by 2p in a single day. That's the fastest rate seen in the UK for nearly 20 years. Well, our East Midlands reporter Will Hollis joins us live from Nottingham. Will.
Yes, well, petrol prices is making headlines again. It's a part of this cost of living crisis that we're seeing. The cost of your food's going up, the cost of your petrol is going up too. It's made a few headlines recently. Earlier in the week on Monday, we heard the headline, the greatest jump, 2.2 pence in a single day for petrol prices. The RAC said then it's only a 1.2 pence away from being £100. Yes, £100 for a family-sized tank, a 55-litre tank. Incredible. 3 litres, 3 figures for the diesel, for the petrol there, for unleaded. Now, of course, where we are in Nottingham, this one here at Tesco, it's £1.89, so it's a little bit less than that £2 figure that we're hearing about. We just looked on petrol prices, something that a lot of people will be using at the moment to check where they might be able to get a cheaper deal. Petrol prices saying that around 50 locations, particularly on motorways, they're charging more than £2 for a litre of petrol, a little bit more for a litre of diesel. I remember when I first learnt to drive not too long ago, a few years ago, my friend said never fill up on a motorway unless you really have to. I think a lot of people will be even resenting whether they have to fill up on the motorway if the prices are getting to £100 plus for a family tank. Now, where we are in Nottingham, this is one of those main roads in and out of the city, but if you do go that way, you'll find yourself eventually on the M1. And so a lot of people right now will be looking at these prices, £1.89. It's a little bit less, a little bit more than some places, but they'll probably be thinking right now is the time to fill up before you get onto the motorway. Of course, there are lots of different prices in lots of different places. That £2 figure, though, most people are saying it's not so much a if this will happen, but when this will happen.
Will, thank you. Looking forward to being back up in that part of the country this weekend. Take care. Should the age you can buy cigarettes be raised from 18 to 21? That's the advice the government is being given today. Should they take it? Back in a moment to discuss.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick.
Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
A government-commissioned report has recommended increasing the age at which you can legally smoke from 18 by 1 year every year. Joining me now is Deborah Arnott, CEO of ASH, that's Action on Smoking and Health. Deborah. We're just awaiting Deborah Arnott, who is there now. Deborah, it's very nice to see you. Thank you for joining us today. So the children of today should never be able to legally smoke, according to today's independent report. Is that realistic?
Well, I think raising the age of sale is definitely realistic. I hope you can hear me because the picture looks terrible. But
yes, we can.
So raising the age of sale is certainly a very good measure that we know will significantly reduce the number of young people taking up smoking. And that's vital because every child who starts is at serious risk of becoming seriously addicted. 2/3 of children who pick up one cigarette and smoke it go on to become addicted smokers, smoking on a daily basis. And many of them will never quit before they suffer serious disease, disability and premature death from smoking. So we want to stop young people starting, but the numbers of young people starting is relatively small compared to the numbers of adult smokers who are addicted already. They're around 6 million. So the top recommendation actually of the Khan review is to invest an additional 125 million in tobacco control measures to help adult smokers quit. And that's the top priority, and that's the top priority for us.
And the best way, or it's suggested that the best way to get adults to quit is to move to vaping. Prices are creeping up there. Is that a problem?
Well, I think vaping can still be a lot cheaper than smoking, particularly because it's cheaper on your health and is less likely to mean you can't work. I think it depends, what sort of things you use. I mean, these disposable vapes that have become very popular are actually quite expensive. If you're a regular vapor, you're much better off using a system that you can refill yourself. But vaping is only part of the solution. We also need mass media campaigns to motivate smokers to try and stop. And we need better enforcement to stop the illicit trade in tobacco and stop sales to underage smokers. There's a whole range of things, and I think that's what the Khan review recommends, not just one measure, whether it's vaping or increasing the age of sale.
And just on a very broad question, why shouldn't people be free to make bad decisions if they choose to do so?
Because they're making them as children. The vast majority of smokers start before the age of 18. Very few start after the age of 21. And teenagers experiment. I certainly did, and I'm sure you did. I mean, I started smoking when I was 10 or 11.
Yeah.
And it took me nearly 30 years before I quit. This is not a lifestyle choice. It's a serious addiction, and it's an addiction of childhood.
Deborah Arnott, I hope to talk to you again on the show, but thank you for your time today. Thank you. The Prime Minister will shortly give a speech on his plans to help people to get onto the housing ladder. The right to buy, that was a policy launched by Margaret Thatcher in the 80s. Now Boris Johnson wants to extend it. Liam Halligan, our economics and business editor, and our housing expert too. I know that's not in your job title, but you are a housing expert too. It sounds great, doesn't it?
Well, the right to buy is, of course, an iconic Conservative policy of the 80s. We remember it from when we were kids. The right to buy did transform the lives and the life chances of lots of working class families, frankly, in social housing, council housing, they're the same thing, because families were able to buy their state-owned houses at a reduced rate, and then that gave them some wealth, and often those houses have been rented out or they've been sold, and the family has moved into a more financially stable situation. So if Boris wants to throw some red meat, some Thatcherite red meat to Conservative backbenchers who are disillusioned of his sort of, lots of high-spending government policies, this sounds like the right thing to do. On the other hand, I'm really concerned about this because the real problem with the original right-to-buy policy, which many of my childhood friends benefited from, by the way, is that those council houses were never replaced in many, many cases. And so the stock of social housing, council housing, is now particularly low, and then the building of new council houses completely collapsed, particularly under Blair and Brown. So we've got a council house waiting list that is more than 1 million strong. And my concern is, again, these council houses won't be replaced, not least because they're being bought off housing associations, which are private charities. They're not the state. And so there's a lot of legal contention about whether or not housing associations are actually going to agree to this.
Right.
And there's a sense that this policy has been rushed through in order to provide the Prime Minister with a good headline.
And the other thing is, it was in the 2015 manifesto, and it was also in the last manifesto too. Yep. Is it going to happen this time?
I think there will be legal issues with the housing associations, which are at the centre of this policy. And I think pretty much any housing analyst would tell you the real issue is the lack of homes, and this won't lead to one extra home being built. In fact, it could discourage local authorities even more from building council homes if they know that within 2 or 3 years they have to sell them off at a below-market rent. And you'll remember from when you were an MP, it's not widely understood, but if a local authority sells off a council house, it's then got to give 4/5 of that money back to the Treasury. So the local authority loses the money, loses the ability to do things. So that's another reason, as well as land availability, planning issues, why so few council houses are being built. And I think this will mean even fewer are built.
Let's look at the state of the UK economy. There's a pretty worrying report out yesterday, wasn't there?
So the OECD issued some economic forecasts. That's the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development, a very influential global think tank. It's based in Paris. They say the UK economy will expand by 3.6% this year. Ordinarily, that would be a very chunky growth number, more like sort of Chinese or Indian style number. But that's partly because during 2021, we were in lockdown for various months of that, so a lot of the economy wasn't there. So it's 3.6% this year, which is pretty good by international standards. But next year is where the headline is, and it is a forecast. Must remember that. But the OECD says the UK won't grow at all next year. 0% growth it's put in its spreadsheets, which is the worst performance of any major economy. And I do think the OECD are over-egging it. They're very much, they're a Paris-based organisation. They're very close to the European Union. They're not going to particularly do the UK any favours whatsoever. But on the other hand, it is a credible organisation, and they're putting their finger on things that I think a lot of us are worried about. The UK's dependence on imported fuel, the UK's dependence on imported food, the fact that the pound has been getting weaker, which, as you know, Gloria, means that those imports get more expensive. That aggravates the cost of living crisis. That means consumer spending falls more. That means there are more supply chain issues, corporate profits fall, investment falls. So we have got an inflation problem in this country. It is leading to lower growth. I think the OECD is being too pessimistic, by the way, but I do think there is a sense that the economy will slow next year, which will make the Prime Minister's problems even worse.
I'm going to talk again at the end of my show too, so you can tell us what's coming up in your brilliant show. Thank you, Liam. I'll bring you the second in my new series, Life and Times, next, where I talk with the big political figures of our generation. Today, it's Labour veteran Alan Johnson, former Cabinet Minister in the last Labour government and former MP for Kingston upon Hull West and Hessle for 20 years. That is after your news.
Thank you, Gloria. It's coming up to 12:30. I'm Rhiannon Jones in the GB newsroom. The government says it will carefully consider an independent review into smoking, which recommends under 18s should never be able to legally buy tobacco. It suggests the legal age in England should be raised from 18 by 1 year every year until no one can buy it. The report also says tobacco firms should be forced to pay a polluter tax to help smokers quit. The average price of filling up a typical family car has surpassed £100 for the first time. The RAC says it's a truly dark day for drivers. The average price for a litre of petrol has reached a record 182p, and diesel is at a record 188p. It's after the biggest daily jump in petrol prices for 17 years. The Prime Minister is set to announce plans for lower-paid workers to use housing benefits to buy their homes. Boris Johnson will make a speech in Lancashire later and is expected to say he'll extend the right-to-buy scheme for housing association tenants. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says he doesn't believe the new measures will be effective.
The announcement today from the Prime Minister is the wrong approach. It is a reheated version of an idea that the government had back in 2015. They piloted it, it didn't work. And if ever you needed evidence that this divided government is completely out of ideas, it's this announcement today which is simply reheating an old idea. They piloted it, it didn't work. They really are at the end of the road.
And the number of deaths involving COVID-19 in England and Wales have dropped to the lowest level since last summer. The Office for National Statistics reports 410 death certificates mentioned coronavirus in the last week of May, the lowest number since July 2021. It's the fourth week in a row the figures have gone down. TV online and DAB Plus radio, this is GB News. Stay with us, though. The briefing with Gloria will be back in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices with honest and civilised conversation. We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now it's time for my second Life and Times, my new series of interviews with the biggest political figures of our generation. I talked with Labour grandee Alan Johnson. He was Home Secretary, Health Secretary, Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer and also MP for Kingston upon Hull West and Hessle from 1997 to 2017. This is his Life and Times. Alan Johnson, I'm going to start with a quote from the veteran political journalist John Rentoul about you. If Alan Johnson had been a little more arrogant, a little madder, he could have been Prime Minister.
John was printing little badges with AJ for PM. Unfortunately, I didn't want to be PM, and I certainly didn't want to be Labour leader, which was kind of a prerequisite to be Prime Minister. So, John, I mean, all nice stuff that people say, oh, you know, you should have been Prime Minister, but if you don't want to be Prime Minister and your heart's not in it, you know, it will show, and it's best not to go anywhere near it. I mean, it has been said of American presidents that anyone who's daft enough to want to be an American president should disqualify themselves from the job. I think there's some truth in that.
Do you think you have to be, in John's word, a bit mad and arrogant? Do you have to be mad and arrogant to want that top job?
There has to be something that I didn't have. I mean, thank God there are people with that. I think you have to be only arrogant in the sense that you really are convinced that you know what's best. I mean, my problem is that I could always see the other side of the argument, and, you know, I was never as emphatic about that, let alone dogmatic. I mean, it's quite useful if you're not dogmatic, and I think if that's one definition of arrogance, that you know exactly what you want and you are absolutely remorseless and ruthless in pursuing it, then they are traits to be the leader. And I think, you know, it's wonderful there are people with those characteristics. Would you want to be locked in a lift with them? No, I don't think so. You know, would you be good mates with them? Probably not.
Now, let's just look at your background. So you were orphaned, you didn't go to university, you left school without qualifications to become a postman. You led a trade union, but you've never been of the far left. What informed your politics? You're pretty centrist in the Labour Party.
Yeah, I had a while of a time, by the way. I mean, I left school to become a rock star. I'm still waiting for that. I mean, I joined the post office when I was 18. I left school when I was 15 and stacked shelves at Tesco's. Was in a couple of bands. I had a while of a time. Why did I never go to the far left? George Orwell. So when I was 14, I had a wonderful English teacher, and I absorbed any book that came anywhere near me. But this lovely teacher, Peter Carlin, who I've dedicated my latest novel to.
When's that? What's that about?
The Late Train to Gypsy Hill. It's a thriller. The heroes are Ukrainians and the villains are Russians, by the way, and I wrote it 3 years ago, so there you are. And I dedicate it to Peter, who's still alive, Peter Carlin, age 90. But he got all us boys reading, it was a boys' school, Animal Farm by George Orwell, and he explained the subtext of the Bolshevik Revolution. And of course, Orwell, a democratic socialist, was warning against totalitarianism, whether it was on the right, fascism, or the left. It's the 1940s when he wrote it. And I just went out and bought everything I could and read everything I could by George Orwell. And so it wasn't, apart from Mr. Carlin, who explained that subtext, it wasn't a teacher it wasn't a university labour club or university tutors who moulded my politics. It was a man who died before I was born, Eric Blair, otherwise known as George Orwell. So I was a Blairite in that sense, even as a 14-year-old. And I just wouldn't, and none of my mates, I mean, my mates around West London, Shepherd's Bush and all that, you know, we got dressed up, we were mods, and we got dressed up because the great definition of a mod by Pete Whedon, who was the manager of The Who, said clean living in difficult circumstances. You know, we didn't want to dress in denim with loads of badges on and walk around, you know, like we'd just been rolled up in a carpet. But all these people were coming to us when we were in disputes and on strikes with my union when I was postman, saying to us, you know, spread the strike. These were all kind of posh kids dressing down. We were poor kids dressing up. And they never meant anything to me at all. We used to laugh at them. I mean, thank God the swappies are around still, the SWP, because, you know, I miss them. Where would you be without them, with this kind of idea that all you have to do is come out on strike and stay out on strike forever and the whole world will be yours? I mean, syndicalism, just one of their crude beliefs. So no, I never fell for the far left, but I certainly was on the left.
I saw a rant you ranting at the head of the left-wing faction, Momentum. It was during or just following Jeremy Corbyn's tenure as Labour leader. Because you're not a finger wagger, but I think you might have finger wagged during this when you said Jeremy Corbyn couldn't lead the working classes out of a paper bag.
Yeah, it was a rant, you're right, and I apologise for it, but it was midnight on election night. We'd just heard about
2019.
the seats. 2019. I mean, we lost Bishop Auckland, we lost Sedgefield, we lost your seat, we lost seats we had been in for ever since, you know, the dawn of history. In comes Landsman, I've known for a long time, and he was a Bennite and all that, boasting that we were going to win Putney. Oh, brilliant, we're going to win Putney. I mean, we lost all these other seats. We lost Scunthorpe, we lost Grimsby, we lost all the seats around me in East Yorkshire, but we're going to win Putney. And, you know, you could see then what the outcome of this adventurism was going to be. The worst election defeat we've experienced in our history, virtually.
Should Jeremy Corbyn be allowed back in the Labour Party?
No way, no. Leave him where he is. And he'll be happy and sanctimonious and pious where he is. Leave him there. He never followed the Labour whip. I mean, this idea that we were allowing this group, the campaign group, to form their own opinions and their own rules and their own whip, and they would follow their own whip. I mean, it was madness. And it led to Momentum, which was a Jeremy Corbyn fan club. I mean, these people are out there and they're entitled to their beliefs, but they've got to stand on their beliefs, not try and infiltrate the Labour Party. The Labour Party has never been to the far left. The trade unionists who formed the Labour Party did, as was famously said, owe more to Methodism than Marxism. And throughout our history, they've been, the far left have tried to steal our clothes because they know that we have purchase in communities. We are part of working class communities. And for these middle class revolutionaries, they've just been trying to wear our cloak. And this was the most successful attempt at it, and it ended in the disaster that we saw.
Now, so you are Blairite, you're New Labour. Those posh New Labour types, you know, the PPE Oxford Brigade. Did you ever feel intimidated when you got into Parliament in 1997? There were a fair number of those. Even more came in slightly later, actually, in 2001 and 2005. What did you think of them?
I wasn't, no, because part of the previous issue that you were saying about Corbyn and these people, I don't look at people with those kind of labels. I mean, I always said about Cameron and Osborne, they were as responsible for their childhoods as I was responsible for mine. They had no choice about whether they were, you know, sent off to Eton or whatever. If I was against Old Etonians, I'd be against George Orwell. You know, he was an Old Etonian. Clem Attlee, you know, etc. So I look at people in terms of humanity, and on the far left, there was a real lack of humanity because they did castigate people because of whatever, it wasn't about the personality at all. It was about something that they believed in that transgressed their beliefs. So I didn't look at it like that. And when I got into politics, it wasn't so much in Parliament because you had all kinds of people there. As you know, we had an ex-taxi driver, Clive Efford. For those who think it's a shame the people who really know how to run the country are too busy driving cabs. We had one in there, and he's still there. Clive, brilliant. You know, we had a couple of bricklayers, we had a gas worker, we had miners. In the civil service, once I became a minister, and I was 11 years as a minister, I met a lot of those, and I never came across an ounce of snobbery. I never experienced it at all. You know, maybe I was fortunate in that respect, but I didn't have anybody looking down at me. Ernie Bevan had the same experience. The great Ernie Bevan, who left school at 13, was orphaned at 9, had no education whatsoever, taught himself to write, but was one of the greatest foreign secretaries we ever had. And he said that he had none of that experience either.
So you were Higher Education Minister. That Labour government, and I remember your speech, you pushed through tuition fees. Yeah. In fact, you personally, because of your upbringing and the nature of your speech, it was said that you contributed a large part to introducing the tuition fees.
Yeah.
Was that the right thing to do?
Yeah, absolutely. God almighty. I mean, this argument about higher education. You know, when I was born, 2% went to university, 2%. And that wasn't because the others didn't qualify, it was because it kept as a, you know, for a tiny elite, for a small elite. And there was a great debate about that. Less means more. Kingsley Amis used to argue this. The more you allow into higher education, the more sort of discredited it will become. This was crazy. And we wanted to expand higher education. There was a huge funding gap in higher education. They needed about 11 billion quid to put our universities on a kind of proper scale and to expand university places. So, you know, I was very keen. I mean, the free university education post the Robbins report hadn't changed things whatsoever. The social class gap in higher education had not narrowed, it had widened. So yeah, kids making a contribution, not when they're kids by the way, but when they've graduated, when they're earning more than 21,000, when the money is taken out of their pay by the Chancellor, and when they've got years and yonks to pay it, and if their wage ever drops, then they stop paying the fees. The people who were opposed to it, of course, were the Daily Mail, the Daily Express, middle-class people who saw free higher education. They were perfectly prepared to pay a lot of money for private schools, but they didn't think they should pay in higher education. They were the people that were most vehemently against it. The kids understood, working class kid, bright working class kid, understood, hold on, I don't have to ask mum and dad for anything. We reintroduced grants as part of that. I don't have to ask my mum and dad for anything.
Kids, didn't
as part of the same deal. It's, you know, it's down to me.
It's gone now, I think. The grant
well, Osborne messed up with that. I've got the, you know, I pay this tuition fee, but I don't see it. It's a million miles away from credit card debt. They understood it very quickly, which is why, you know, as I went round to different campuses, at the time, it wasn't the students that were the problem. It was people who had been students and felt this was some kind of crime against humanity. No one's going to do away with tuition fees. Graduates making a contribution towards their very expensive higher education will be there forevermore.
So the backdrop to that last Labour government, the longest Labour government ever, but this war between number 10 and number 11, Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, it was always rumbling, it was always constantly written about, it flared up, it calmed, but none of us know, actually. You had a ringside seat, you were a minister during that. How bad was it?
Oh, it was awful. I didn't understand it fully. I mean, that was tuition fees. Gordon was against tuition fees until Tony had gone, and then he was very much in favour of tuition fees. And I admire both of them. I worked for both of them, and I really, really admire Gordon. God, if you had a man with his, you know, ethics back in power, we'd be a different country. But why didn't the two get on? They'd been such close friends. I know as much as you know, Gloria. It was all about Gordon thinking he was due to get the succession after however many years, and claims that Tony reneged on a deal. Although he's never told me that, I'd never heard that from the horse's mouth. But what did it mean? It meant you went to cabinet meetings where Gordon would just sit and, like a naughty kid in a class, and, you know, with his head down, wouldn't even make eye contact with Tony. And to me, they were the Lennon-McCartney, as was famously said, of Labour politics. And if they'd have worked together more closely at that crucial period of the handover from one to the other, it could have been a very different, we could have still been in power. Of course, what happened is that Gordon couldn't wait, even though he knew Tony had said he's not going to stand in another election. And that really soured the party, and I think was detrimental to us in government.
Another thing that was detrimental to your time in government, the Iraq War.
Yeah, there's been a lot of revisionism on that. You know, people who were there. This was the only time, first time this country has ever been to war by a parliamentary decision. It's always been royal proclamation. And the people who made that decision in Parliament had to take some ownership for it. Now, you get all this stuff about we were misled, weapons of mass destruction. Here's the thing about weapons of mass destruction. We know Saddam and his psychotic sons had weapons of mass destruction. He used them twice against his own people, the Iraqi Kurds and the Marsh Arabs. We know he had them. That's why the weapons inspectors were called in by the UN as part of 12 years of UN resolutions to say you ought to get rid of them. You can read, go back, I know you weren't there at the time, go back and read the Hansard debate when Parliament decided to go to war. It had Hans Blix, who was the weapons inspector, laying out the weapons of mass destruction which we know Saddam had and was unaccounted for. Poison gas, sarin, all the dreadful... We know he had them. What people didn't realise that somehow he'd got rid of them. I mean, remember, we went to war because the UN set yet another deadline. If he doesn't let the weapons inspectors come in and have open access, serious consequences will follow. That's the exact words of Resolution 1441. And to back off once again, after 12 years of him running rings around the United Nations, would have been disastrous. We'll never know what would have happened if Saddam and his psychotic sons had stayed there. But I know one thing, if I was in that same situation, listening to all of that evidence over again, I would have voted the same way.
We're coming towards the end now. I want you to imagine having the job that you said that you'd had absolutely no desire to do. You're Labour Prime Minister. What's the first thing you're going to do? What's your number one thing?
I much more enjoyed writing books, Gloria, but if you pin me down for that, it's early years. It's going back to those early years. The kind of society we want. We'll call it what you want. I see it's called levelling up now, but the kind of fair society we want. These inequalities in our society don't start when a kid gets to 10 or 12 or 18. They start to talk to anyone who's involved in this at a year, 18 months, i.e. bright kid, working class background, starts to decline against perhaps less bright kid from a middle class background. Happens in the very early years. That's why Sure Start was so important. That's why investment in those early years was so important. That's why the social aspects of learning. We had a scheme on this, on the early years, of teaching kids how to resolve disputes between them without battling and fighting and shouting at each other. It's a very important aspect of the education system, and it's practically non-existent now. Sure Start's gone. It's a shell compared to what it once was. And I would put money, effort and time into that. And incidentally, it's not higher education that was lacking the kind of funds. It was those very early years. So people talking about, they ought to have free higher education, would need to take that money, 11, 12 billion, from the places where it's most needed and where it's most important. So I'd focus on that, and I'd carry a law that said Queen's Park Rangers had to win the Premiership every season. They're the two things I would really concentrate on.
Right, very finally. And let's take it as a given that when I say who's the one to watch or who could you see being the next Labour Prime Minister, let's just take it as a given that you're going to say, well, of course, Keir Starmer will be the next Labour Prime Minister.
Yeah.
Right, OK.
Lisa Nandy.
OK. Brilliant. Alan Johnson.
If I can't have you, because you're out now, I'll have Lisa Nandy.
She's welcome to it. Yeah. But lots of the nation think it should have been you, including me.
That's nice of them. That's nice of them. Thanks,
you.
Gloria.
Thank you. You can watch my Life and Times and Real Me interviews on our YouTube channel or, of course, via our app. Thanks for sending in your views today. Angela's been in touch regarding smoking. I am frightened at the way this government is trying to run our lives. We all must take some responsibility for ourselves. Noddy emailed, I bought my council house back in 2020 at an extremely generous discount and was very grateful for the opportunity, as I don't think I would have been able to afford a larger mortgage. It is a good option for people to get on the property ladder, but I agree that the homes need to be replaced. Eileen says, I like the fundamental ethos of the right to buy, but I take issue with housing benefit being used to fund some sales. Why should taxpayers pay for people to get on the housing ladder? Up next, it's On the Money with Liam Halligan. And he's here now. What's coming up?
We're going to be talking about this housing policy, Gloria. At the top of my show, we're expecting Boris Johnson to speak. We can't say where the Prime Minister is, but all will be revealed after his speech. What I've seen in these proposals so far, they're pretty vague. I've got major problems with how they're designed. I think some of the GBNews viewers and listeners' comments there were absolutely on point. Unless these council houses are replaced, then the policy, while good for the families involved, is bad for the country as a whole. And that was the problem with the Thatcher era right to buy. So many of the council homes weren't replaced. I don't see anything the government's offering up that suggests that they will be. But, you know, let's wait and see.
And you'll be discussing that, and the Prime Minister, of course, Liam will bring you that speech live. You've been watching or listening to The Briefing with me, Gloria De Piero. Tom Howard is here tomorrow at noon. I am back on Monday. Thank you for your company. Now it is time for your weather.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. Dry and bright in the east with some sunshine, cloudier further west with some rain. Not a huge amount of rain. The weather front that's moving into the west is a relatively weak feature, but it is attached to an area of low pressure which is relatively deep for the time of year. We don't often see lows like this in early June, and it will bring some windy weather later Thursday and through the next couple of days. But for the time being, light winds, sunny spells in the east of England. Central and eastern Scotland also largely dry and bright. Just a few showers for Aberdeenshire, Caithness and Sutherland. Cloudier skies for western England, Wales and the far west of Scotland with some outbreaks of rain, mostly on the light side. Clear